Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, I know.
Well, people, but actually, is there anything Jane like that? Is it?
Yeah, yeah.
So you don't have to leave that? No, no. I think that a couple of companies.
Okay, right. Yeah. We will start the meeting shortly in just 2 minutes. Thank you.
So I worked for the River Focus part of the like one.
That's the part.
Yes.
Yes.
Work sense. Interesting. Yeah, first that's interesting. See, the city is fine.
Well, there's a bunch of these.
So it's good. It's good. It's good.
Everybody who's coming with this and the deals and the public.
Yeah, they all did.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Ashkan Azarni. I'm civil engineer with County of San Diego Flood Control Section and also project manager for Hydrology Manual Update Project. Please note that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all attendees after the event. Depending on any technical issues that may arise during the meeting, the recording may be available at a later time. I would like to start to cover a few housekeeping items for those attending in person. Parking is available in the Environmental Service Department lot in designated employee only and visitor spaces, with additional parking available along the Ridge Haven Court. Please, if you park your car in neighboring lots, please feel free to move your car unless it might be towed. We will have dedicated Q&A sessions throughout the presentation, so we kindly ask you to keep your questions until those times. Also, refreshment is available. Please help yourself. For our virtual guests joining from Microsoft Teams, we kindly ask you to keep your microphones turned off and muted during the presentations. However, feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box at any time. We are continuously checking that one to respond them during the Q&A sessions again. I would like to introduce today's presenters representing the County of San Diego. We are pleased to have Sarah Agahi, San Diego County Flood Control District Manager, and myself, Ashkan Azarni. I'm civil engineer with County of San Diego Flood Control Section. From RIG Engineering, we have Ash Pantman, Associate Project Manager, and Laura Henry, Associate Project Engineer. Representing River Focus Water Resource Consultants, we have John Vidusich, Senior Hydraulic Engineer. Here is the agenda for today. We will start with the welcoming remarks and introductions. The presentation itself will be divided into 2 sessions. The first session will be covered chapter by chapter overview and rainfall intensity change in FS 14. And we will have a Q&A session opportunity Following the first session, we will have a 15 minutes break before starting the second session, which will cover the new software tool, it's the Hydro tools, and special topics like sediment bulking factor, and we will overview general concept of grandfathering criteria. And again, we will have another Q&A session. With that, I would like to invite Sarah Agat.
Thank you, Ashton. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the people who attended in person and also to the people who are attending online. We appreciate your participation today. I also would like to give a sincere thanks to Rick Engineering, who has helped us through this process, and the Technical Advisory Committee. I think there are members in the room with us today who participated in the Technical Advisory Committee. If any of you did, would you please raise your hand? Well, thank you. Really appreciate your input. So my comments will be very brief by way of introduction. I think that you all know that San Diego County is the second most populous county in California and the fifth most populous county in the United States, and is larger in area than the combined states of Rhode Island and Delaware. So it ranks behind Los Angeles County for population in California, but we're still pretty mighty. The areas in yellow are the different unincorporated communities. And I wanted to be clear that today the manual that we're presenting to you is the county's manual for the unincorporated areas only. Many of the municipalities do adopt the manual, but I do want to give you the caveat that it's important to check with city staff if you rely on the manual, because they probably have some slightly different requirements. And for example, the city of San Diego has a 2-foot freeboard requirement, whereas the county for the unincorporated areas, we have a 1-foot freeboard requirement. So again, we're talking about for the unincorporated county today. Okay. I did want to share a little bit of information about the county board. The county is governed by a 5-member board of supervisors, and the supervisors set priorities, approve the county's operational plan, which is our budget, and set local policy. And the board does appoint commissioners to a flood control district advisory commission, who advises staff on policy, budget. This manual, our commissioners helped review and provided input to this manual. I want to acknowledge Dr. Mary Yang, the vice president of the Flood Control District Advisory Commission. So thank you for coming, Dr. Yang. The board generally relies on state and federal law to guide flood-related water policy, although the board has adopted some provisions with respect to private land development projects in map floodplains, which are more stringent than the federal minimum. So one example is the 1-foot freeboard. To be clear, the county applies these provisions to our own capital improvement projects as well. So these are the requirements that would govern all development in the unincorporated area, whether that be public or private. I start many of my presentations like this. How many of you are from San Diego originally? Okay, well, first of all, you're all spoiled. As someone who is not from San Diego, let me tell you, you live a very privileged life. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago, and it has a very different climate and weather regime. And when I moved to San Diego, knowing nothing about San Diego's climate and weather, I thought, oh, there's really no flooding problems here. This was over 20 years ago. With our average of 266 sunny days in a year in San Diego, it's easy to forget about flooding. Not so easy in the last couple of years. We had some pretty dramatic reminders. But it's important to know that the flood risk is quite large, and that's what's driving these regulations, is the protection of, most importantly, people, but also structures, the environment, infrastructure. 1 in 5 Californians and over $580 billion worth of infrastructure are vulnerable in the state of California to flooding. So this includes transportation, energy, water supply, sewer networks. All of these are at risk of disruption due to flooding. And with a housing shortage in California, and I won't say the rising homeless population, the fact that we have quite significant populations of people who are unhoused, there's just a huge need for expanding housing options. And we certainly want to support those and accommodate those, but we want those to be done safely, with the protection of the public in mind and to account for the flood risk. This is an exhibit from the California Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers California Flood Futures Report that the county actually participated in. This was in 2013, and other cities participated in this. This report estimates that in the South Coast area, which you can see is identified in kind of a darker orange, which is from Ventura County to the border, 3.41 million people are living in a 500-year floodplain, and $230 billion worth of infrastructure is at risk of flooding. The Public Policy Institute of California forecasts that California needs to spend at least $34 billion to upgrade dams, levees, and other floodplain management infrastructure. Accomplishing these upgrades within 25 years would mean spending $1.4 billion per year, which is more than twice the current level of investment. This is a map of San Diego County. This was produced for the county's hazard mitigation plan. It's a multi-jurisdictional, multi-hazard mitigation plan. Bless you. What we're seeing on this map, if you look at the legend, it shows the areas that are at risk of flooding brought on by intense or prolonged rainfall. And I think you all can remember right off the top of your head where we have had significant flooding in our region that has resulted, unfortunately, in loss of life and millions of dollars in property damages. So the average annual precipitation in San Diego County ranges from 10 inches on the coast to approximately 45 inches in the mountains to 3 inches in the desert east of the mountains. The central and eastern portions of the county are most susceptible to flash floods, where mountain canyons, dry creek beds, and high deserts are the prevailing terrain. If you've ever worked or traveled through Borrego, you're probably familiar with the alluvial fans, which are very unique and high risk areas that flood. So there are special requirements for buildings in alluvial fans. So this map shows the location and extent of the flood hazard areas for the county. High hazard, so-called 100-year floodplain or 1% annual probable event zones are generally concentrated within the coastal areas, including the bays, coastal inlets, and estuaries, and those are in the jurisdictions primarily of the cities. Major watershed areas connecting the local mountain range to the coastal regions are also areas where flash floods are common. So the red on this map shows the 100-year floodplain, orange shows the 500-year floodplain, and the black triangles show the locations of dams. There are over 3,600 miles of rivers and streams which threaten residents and over 200,000 acres of flood-prone property. So the purpose of that was to set the stage of why this is important. And how many of you are from a city or a county or do work on behalf of cities or counties? Okay, that's quite a lot of people here. We often, and I work for the County of San Diego, we are often questioned by private developers. Well, why do I have to meet these requirements? My client has lived here for 30 years and they've never seen a flood of this magnitude. So I'm hopeful that this shared with you the reason about why we have this standard and why we have the requirements in effect. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Ash from Rick Engineering to give the chapter by chapter overview.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here today. I'm Ash Paranthaman. I'm an associate project manager at RIC's Water Resources Division, and I'm the RIC PM on the manual update. I'm super excited to be here. I know this update is a long time coming, so I'm going to dive right in. My goal here is to give a chapter by chapter overview of the San Diego County Hydrology Manual update. I like to think of the hydrology manual as the county's official rulebook for answering one very important question. When it rains, where does the water go? How fast does it get there? And how much of it can we expect? Engineers use this manual every day to design, channels, storm drains, culverts, you name it. So it's a pretty important document, and it's important to keep it up to date. The last major update to this manual was back in 2003, which was a long time ago. So obviously a lot has changed since then. New data, better science, and new software, you name it. So today I'm walking you through what's new, what changed, and why it matters. So let's dive in. To state the obvious here, the 2003 hydrology manual is being superseded. The update is a standalone replacement, not a patch. It works hand in hand with the county's hydraulic design manual, and I like to think of it as hydrology answers how much water, hydraulic manual answers how do we convey it. We also, on top of these two manuals, we have the county's BMP design manual that dictates the water quality criteria for developments on top of the hydrology and hydraulic manuals. Like Sarah mentioned, other local municipalities will have their own, often have their own manuals. So please be sure to refer to the city as you're working in and use the right manuals. All right, let's get into the manual itself. Section 1 is the introduction section. Well, introduction might sound like fluff. This one got some pretty serious updates. The biggest addition is we added 2 entirely new subsections discussing San Diego's precipitation patterns and weather systems that cause flooding. Most of our rain, the rainy season from October through April, comes from cool season frontal systems that is rolling in off the Pacific. Those westerly winds, push moist air up the peninsular ranges. As that air rises and cools, it drops a lot of rain on the windward coastal and mountain slopes. By the time it gets to the desert side, it's bone dry, and that's called the orographic effect. All this discussion is now included in the manual's introduction section. We also have summer monsoons, warm moisture-laden air pushing up from Mexico and California, typically July through September. These storms are shorter, but it's still significant, and discussion about that is also now in the manual. On top of that, we also have a discussion on the atmospheric rivers. We've heard the term many times on the news. These are the long, narrow channels and channels of moisture in the atmosphere. We also have discussions on NCFRs, which stands for narrow cold frontal rain bands. These are the events that produce a short, punishing burst of rain that overwhelms storm drains and cause flooding. We also have a case study on the January 2024 flash flood event that many of you might remember, which was pretty devastating. There's also updates on the tropical cyclone history. We've covered it all the way through Hurricane Hillary in 2023, which reminds us, tropical storms don't just stay in the tropics. Places like San Diego can also get tropical storms. There's new language on maintenance requirements for channels and drainage systems. including, resource agency permits, the need for it from Army Corps, CDFW, the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And all the manual references have been updated, like the old HEC1 and TR20 modeling programs. They've all been replaced with HEC-HMS. And there's also reference to a new software suite called SD Hydro Tools, which we'll discuss later on in the presentation. There's some figure updates also in section 1. There's a new 30-year rainfall climatology map and updated alert station map. So these round out the changes to section 1. All right, section 2 is about how engineers find and use existing flood flow information and how they decide what design criteria to use. The old manual uses a dual frequency approach, basically, designed for the 50-year storm upstream of a major roadway and the 100-year storm at or downstream of one. This obviously created some complexity and inconsistency. The new manual simplifies all this. It's basically just 100-year design frequency for all hydrologic analysis. So one standard, it's cleaner, more consistent. The specific infrastructure criteria, things to use to size storm drains and inlets, those are handled in the hydraulic design manual, and the hydraulic design manual was updated in 2014, and that's still current. There's also clarity on using FEMA flood insurance studies, the flow rates from FEMA FIS. The manual now explicitly states it's for FEMA regulatory purposes only. Things like remapping and NORI certification. For actually designing a facility, we have to follow the hydrology manual methodology. And then what did I miss? If an engineer is using a previously calculated flow rate from an old study, they need to have the current engineer of record certify it and compare it to current calculations if they have any. And if there's any big differences, it needs to be explained in their report. Lastly, the master plan study flow rates are flagged to be used for planning purposes only. If you're designing a specific project, you need a site-specific analysis. Section 3 covers the rational method, the classic Q equal to CIA. The big change here, and this theme repeats throughout the manual, is replacing the old P6 and P24 isopluvial maps and intensity equation with data from NOAA 14. So those old maps showed the 6R and 24R precipitation values across the county. They were good for their time, but NOAA 14 is the modern standard, and it is frankly more accurate with site-specific values. What this means practically, the old intensity formula is gone. It's retired. So in its place, we have a new log-log interpolation method directly from NOAA 14 data. It's more accurate and more flexible because it's site-specific. The old intensity duration chart, figures 3.1 and 3.2 are also gone now. And Appendix B now in the manual walks you through how to access NOAA 14 and get the intensity data that you need. And SD Hydro Tools, the software suite, we're going to have a dedicated session on later today. Also has a dedicated module to automate this calculation. There's also an important clarification in Table 3.1, which lists the runoff coefficients by land use. The update makes it clear that those impervious percentages in the table are for planning level studies only. If you're actually designing a stormwater conveyance system or doing project level study, you need to use the actual impervious percentage of that specific site. So use the real numbers instead of just making an assumption. Section 4 is on NRCS hydrologic method. This is the method that we use when our watershed is larger than 1 square mile. It's more sophisticated than rational method because it models not just the peak flow, but the entire shape of the flood event over time, the full hydrograph. Section 4 follows the same playbook as Section 3. Old P6 and P24 isopluvial maps are are out. No Atlas 14 is in. Precipitation depth for all durations up to 24 hours will now come from No Atlas 14. The old 45 to 65% P6 over P24 adjustment is gone. The old intensity formula, it's being replaced with the same log-log interpolation approach, like the rational method. On the software side, the SDUH, San Diego Unit Hydrograph peak discharge program is being replaced with SD Hydro Tools. Within SD Hydro Tools, there will be a dedicated module for San Diego Unit Hydrograph, which handles the single basin hydrographs and peak flow calculations. But when you need to route flows through multiple basins and combine hydrographs, which is the more complex scenario, HEC-HMS can be used, and it's the required software. Technical references throughout section 4 have also been updated. Old HEC TD15 reference is being replaced with HEC-HMS technical reference manual, and old No Atlas 2 citation is now No Atlas 14. Section 5 is on erosion and sedimentation. This one also got some serious updates. There's a brand new topic here that I think a lot of people will find relevant, sediment bulking, and there's a dedicated session on this later later in the presentation. But I'd like just to give a overview of what it is. So sediment bulking, imagine a flash flood, coming down a channel, and it carries not just water, but it also carrying sand, gravel, debris. So that extra solid material mixed in with the water is called bulking. And that flow, that's about 30% sediment by volume, can behave very differently compared to just water for the same discharge rate. So back in 2020, a technical advisory subcommittee was formed to study this phenomenon and make recommendations. So they commissioned River Focus to do a comprehensive study, and that study was completed in October 2022. So it drew on, practices from Southern California counties and the latest research. The result is there's new guidance now on sediment bulking under two conditions: normal design condition and post-fire situations. So John's going to get into that into more detail later in the presentation. There's also sample workbook problems on how to calculate sediment bulking. Last thing, the old universal soil loss equation is being replaced with Russell 2, and the rainfall factor, rainfall erosivity factor, R factor, uses No Atlas 14 data consistent with the rest of the manual. Section 6 takes the rational method from section 3 one step further. Instead of just calculating peak flow, it builds a complete hydrograph, a time series picture of how flow rises and falls over the course of storm. This is really important when we are designing detention basins. So this section was fully rewritten. The new section lays out a 4-step procedure on how to build a hydrograph from start to finish through rational method. It includes a detailed incremental rainfall block methodology, essentially breaking the storm into small time slices and accounting for each one. Rainfall data is again now from No Atlas 14 for durations 5 minutes to 6 hours, using the same log-log interpolation framework as the rest of the manual. And the old legacy equations are all retired. Some of you might know this, the old RAT Hydro program that you can find on the county's website is being replaced with the SD Hydro Tool software. The new tool automates the 4-step hydrograph procedure and gives you a hydrograph that is fully compatible with the HEC-HMS. Section 7 is the shortest section in the manual. It's about the water quality considerations. The change here is pretty minimal. The new version simply directs you to the county's BMP design manual for any water quality requirements. Side note, all local agencies, they have their own BMP design manual, so please make sure that you're using the right one. Besides all the section updates, we also have workbooks which have sample problems. They've all been updated to reflect the shift to NOAA Atlas 14, the transition to HEC-HMS from HEC 1. There's also a new sample problem on sediment bulking calculations. The support sections have been updated as well. Acronyms, glossary, acknowledgements, new figures, they've all been updated. And before I wrap up and turn it over to Laura for the next session, let me give you a 30-second summary on what really drove this update. One is NOAA Atlas 14. This is the single biggest change that's going to touch every hydrologic method in the manual. Basically, site-specific rainfall data replacing the old intensity equation. And two, SD Hydro Tools, a brand new software that is designed specifically for San Diego County, replacing multiple older standalone programs. So it makes the workflow faster and more consistent. And three, sediment bulking. So for the first time, we have formal guidance on how to account for sediment and debris in flood flows. That brings us to the end of the section by section walkthrough. I'll hand it off to Laura now. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, I'm Laura Henry from RIC, and I am going to talk to you about the day-to-day actions of preparing hydrologic calculations with this switch to NOAA Atlas 14. What does it mean that you will really do as an engineer preparing a hydrology study? NOAA Atlas 14, the documentation is available online. This is offering us much more current rainfall data. And in addition to having more than 30 years more rainfall data encompassed in it than what we had in our isopluvial maps, it also provides us detailed spatial variability of how intensity varies across the county, because we have the time intensity pairs unique to all different locations in the county. So we have better representation of the rainfall because there have been more gauges that have been recording rainfall and that have contributed to this data. And also, instead of having one intensity slope represented by one intensity equation for the county, we now have varying intensity slope across the county. So with this, after 40 years of service, or more than 40 years of service, we're sending off the intensity equation to retirement and wishing it happy trails and moving on to a new procedure. The rainfall depths and the rainfall intensity, instead of the isopluvial maps and the equation that we had in our 2003 manual, we will now be obtaining those rainfall depths and the rainfall intensities from NOAA Atlas 14. And this is published through NOAA's website on a precipitation frequency data server. This is the website shown here. Here's a snapshot of what it looks like. I think probably many of you have already visited this and seen this. This is what it looks like. The online precipitation frequency data server interface is going to be the primary source for obtaining the data. However, you might want to be aware of some backup options just in case you're ever offline, if you have an internet outage, or if NOAA has an outage for a little bit. For those of you that use GIS and that keep a library of GIS data on your own server, you can actually download the NOAA Atlas 14 data grids that are the basis of the PFDS interface, and you can store them on your own library. In addition, a copy of the 100-year data grid is embedded within the SD Hydro Tools program. So you can obtain 100-year rainfall data from SD Hydro Tools. So if you ever can't access the NOAA Atlas 14 website, you'll have that backup in SD Hydro Tools. So with this, we've removed the isopluvial maps from Appendix B of the hydrology manual and replaced that with instructions for how to use the online PFDS interface and or how to use SD Hydro tools to obtain the data. So when gathering the NOAA Atlas 14 data straight off the website, first we open the website and select the state of California. Then we select the data type and the units and the time series type. Now the data type could be inches or it could be inches per hour, depending on what type of calculations you're working on. I'd recommend just download both versions, one version of inches and one version of inches per hour for your project. We set this to English units, and the time series type, set the time series type to partial duration series. You can use any of the available options for selecting the location that you'd like to get the data. And then print the data so that you can store a copy of that data in your project file. And once it's been saved, once you've printed data for your project, you won't need to revisit the server to look at the data. You'll have that copy stored for your project, and you can include a copy of that data in your drainage study report. So when gathering the data, we're looking to gather the data specific to each project or study that we're working on. If it's a small project with a rational method analysis, a small watershed, you probably would select the project location as the location to get the data. For NRCS hydrology or larger watersheds, we usually select the watershed centroid, which may be off-site from the actual project. So it's really important to keep track of the latitude and longitude for the selected location when you select your data. As long as you record that latitude and longitude, you'll always be able to reproduce the exact same data from going to the website. So it's really important to just keep track of that latitude and longitude, especially when it's offsite from the project. So now we'll talk about how to use the data. The data that we're getting from NOAA Atlas 14 is being given to us in time intensity pairs or time depth pairs. And we'll want to pay attention to which units we're working in, whether it's inches or inches per hour, because you can download both of those. So depending on what computations you're using, you'll either need your data in terms of time versus inches or time versus inches per hour. For times that are in between the given data pairs, for example, maybe you have a rational method time of concentration of 7 minutes, which is in between your 5-minute and your 10-minute data that you get from NOAA Atlas 14. Then we use log-log interpolation between the given data pairs. So just as a reminder, we're not entering the P6 into the intensity equation. Instead, what we're switching to is the log-log interpolation between paired data points. So we have new procedures for this written up in sections 3, 4, and 6, and the workbook of the hydrology manual. The equations for log-log interpolation are provided in section 3. There are 3 forms of the equation provided. All 3 forms of the equation produce the same results, and I invite you to test that and prove it to yourself. It's provided in 3 forms because different engineers visualize equations in different ways. So these are just 3 different visualizations of the log-log interpolation equation. In addition, the new SD Hydro Tools program provides an interpolation tool that you can use like a calculator where you can punch in the time that you're interested in and get an interpolated rainfall depth and intensity. So this switch to NOAA Atlas 14 applies in a couple of different procedures throughout the manual. It applies to the intensity in the rational method equation Q equals CIA. In section 4, where we have the NRCS hydrologic method, it applies to the rainfall depths that go into the hyetograph. And in section 6, it applies to the rainfall depths that are in each rainfall block in the construction of a rational method hydrograph. Because of the change, we did retire RAT Hydro and San Diego Unit Hydrograph, or SDUH, because those programs have been built on the intensity equation. So RAT Hydro is now replaced with a module within SD Hydro Tools called RAT Hydro. And SDUH is replaced with a module that's also called San Diego Unit Hydrograph. SD Hydro Tools also adds a new module, something that there wasn't a legacy program for, but a module that creates a rainfall hyetograph for the NRCS studies. All of the example problems in the hydrology manual workbook have been updated to reflect the NOAA Atlas 14 intensity input to give an example to follow as practice for how to apply this in the different procedures of rational method and NRCS hydrologic method and rational method hydrograph. With that, we'll start taking questions for our first roundtable of questions.
Okay, we have one hand raised. Now, this is Sarah. Sarah, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sarah Daskebi from City of San Diego Stormwater Department, and thank you for the great presentation. I have a question for Ash related to the regional flood flow information. I think it was slide 14. Do you mind if you elaborate more on that? That you talk about the FIS rate limited to the regulatory purposes, and also like all the flow rates and Q must follow the hydrology manual, but if there are a big difference, significant difference must be discussed. So I want to understand that. So if the designer come up with a different flow compared to FEMA or the published FIS flow, which one do they need to follow for remapping? Do they now, based on the new hydrology, do they have to use the design flow, which might be higher than FEMA or lower than FEMA, or can they still follow the FEMA FIS flow rate?
Hydraulic structures which are designed in the flood, then you would use the new hydrology manual to find out what the Q is. Design your structure for that.
So I apologize. Sarah, I think I might have put you on mute for the first part of the answer. Did you hear the first part of the answer?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, so maybe I can summarize. So for any requirements for FEMA, CLOMAR, LOMAR, elevation certificate, no rise, the FIS should be used. But for design purposes of any sort of structure that's going to be, actual on the ground, the hydrology manual methodology should be used. Did that answer your question?
I believe yes, but I want to understand that the bullet point that mentioned that the flow rate comparison required a significant difference must be discussed. I want to understand that if there are a big difference between the FIS flow rate and the design flow rate, then which one basically applies and what needs to be discussed.
Do you want me to answer that?
I can answer.
Go
I
ahead.
think you need to work with the county and the floodplain administrator then, like whenever there's a big difference like that, it's really specific to your site and figure out the best path forward. But I think, FEMA also updated their advice study for this case, so we go very recently. So even after that, if there are significant differences, then they need to be, focused discussion.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, I see some more hands raised. Chris Eckert, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the team, Ash and Lori. You did a fine job of presenting, and I've had the privilege of being in your trainings before. I have a couple questions. I think they're quick answer. If you could please, the storm duration, are we still thinking of a 24-hour storm, or is it still a combination of a 6-hour storm? It wasn't clear what the storm duration is. And I can't hear if people are talking.
One sec, they're just getting
Okay.
the mic passed.
No problem.
The storm duration, is this question related to the rational method hydrograph?
Yes,
Or-
well, it's in general, like, before we had the P6 and the P24, and you had a ratio of the two storm durations to help you determine what precipitation you would use to calculate the intensity. So now that we're going with the NOAA Atlas 14, are we looking at the 24-hour storm to get that intensity?
So let me answer the first part about comparing P6 to P24 first. So we will no longer need to look at the ratio of P6 over P24 and verify that it's within a certain range, because we are wholesale adopting new NOAA Atlas 14 data, and we don't have the same concerns about the ratio. In the earlier data, there were many more gauges that were reporting 24-hour data than 6-hour data. So there was concern that 6-hour could be a little bit out of range. And that's why we had that little check of comparing P6 over P24, make sure that P6 didn't get too far out of range. But with the adoption of NOAA Atlas 14 data, this is all very good, very up-to-date data. So that concern has been removed. So we no longer have to do that procedure. Then as far as the duration of the storm, so when preparing rational method calculations, the duration of the storm really is your time of concentration that matters. And that time of concentration will be calculated from the NOAA Atlas 14 data pairs, which start as short duration as 5 minutes. So in rational method analysis, you'll typically see times in concentration ranging from about 5 minutes to maybe 30 minutes or so. And so those will be the data points that you'll be working with from NOAA Atlas 14 is your 5-minute intensity, 10-minute intensity, 15-minute, and 30 minutes. And maybe you'll add your 60-minute into there just to cover any possible time of concentration you might obtain for rational method.
Okay, got it. So there's no like intensity that pairs up with the storm, like the curves that we used to have, like that city manual has those IDF curves where you line up the, for example, the 100-year. Actually, take it back. You have, I think, an IDF curve based on the storm duration of like a 6-hour, for example, and then you, like you say, your TC is equal to your duration. So your time of concentration is equal to your duration when you're trying to calculate the intensity. But I thought those were based off of like, hey, your storm is 6 hours long. Your storm is 24 hours long. So when we go to NOAA Atlas 14, do we have to go to a location that provides intensities for that duration, or is it just is?
NOAA Atlas 14 provides various durations all throughout the county. So any point that you select from the NOAA Atlas 14 data interface, when you select a point, for that specific point, you will receive intensities for various durations, all the way from 5 minutes through even longer than 24 hours. And those will be with the applicable intensities for your project.
Okay, got it. Is there any updated guidance on the initial travel time? I know this has caused some confusion between like the city's manual and the county's manual. Some define this as, you know, the first 100 feet of travel time of flow. Some define this as travel time to the inlet. Any new information on Tisabay?
Update, there have been no changes to the procedures for calculating the initial time of concentration.
Okay, and how about C values? Any updates on the coefficient and C coefficient?
With this update, there have been no changes to the rational method C coefficient, except to put in a clarification that C coefficients should be calculated based on the actual expected imperviousness for sites rather than the planning level impervious percentages that had been assigned in table 3.1.
Okay, and then last question, for those who, and I think Wayne had this in the chat too, I had the same question. For those who are used to using programs like AES and Civil Design, is there a workaround to still be able to use those tools, or should users plan to retire those tools as well?
So I myself am an AES user, so I'm afraid I don't have an answer for Civil yet at the moment. As an AES user, I have tested this and determined that you can combine the City of San Diego's intensity module, in which you input time intensity pairs, with the County of San Diego's time of concentration module. So that provides the workaround in which you would be able to continue using AES as soon as this manual is adopted. It's just, so what you do is, instead of selecting the county's intensity module, you would select the City of San Diego intensity module and then combine that with the County of San Diego's time of concentration module.
And let me add something to that as well. If you all remember, I think that Dr. Ted Ramatka was the one who created the software. And during previous updates of the manual, there was coordination with him. Unfortunately, he passed away. We are discussing with his son. We will include documentation on our webpage for this workaround that Laura has described, but we hope for a more permanent solution that doesn't require a workaround. Thank you for that question, Chris. We'll move on. I see Samuel, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Sarah had said, and I might have a follow-up to my question depending on how it's responded to, but besides FIS, is that statement about comparing to previous design flows kind of like when a city has their storm system design and you're punching into it from your site and there's a previous queue, are we talking about what we're contributing to it and the resulting queue of that, or just a regional watershed analysis? How far does that go in terms of comparing your queue and application of that?
Talking about when there's a whole study and you're comparing the two, that the questions?
Did you hear that question?
I didn't hear. Sorry.
What is it?
Was that question about comparing queues from an old training study that you'll use the old the manual compared to HBO analysis? Is that the question?
Yeah, the concern I'm raising, I guess, in my head is that if we're comparing our study, like if we're updating a previous study that was done on a previous, design standard, are we reanalyzing an entire watershed just to show how our, a new site discharge impacts that? Or, obviously if it increases the queue, it's going to increase the flow of the pipe. So then the whole storm system of, upstream of that has to get reanalyzed. I'm just catastrophizing the statement you had made and and wondering how far does that apply and how we have to reanalyze.
In general, what we're seeing is this update was adopting OR plus 14. The cues that you get are going to be lesser than the cues you get using the testing day. Based on my testing, and they're like in the range of 30 to 40% is what you would see if you take those down. So I don't think you'll run into issues where you that you're calculating now, the methodology is going to be higher than what done with the old one. If that makes sense.
I think just speaking from the county, I would say there are a lot of site-specific attributes that probably are worthy of talking to your county PM to talk through those issues to make these decisions. There's not one size fits all answer. And I understand, Ash, what you're saying about playing with, calculating Qs. I just want to be clear, when the counties put together this technical advisory committee to evaluate making changes to the hydrology manual, we did not go in with any preconceived notion that we think that Qs should be higher or lower. We tasked our consultants to look at, the best available engineering data, look at what other Southern California counties were doing, and to make recommendations for what made the most sense technically, and whether the Qs were going to be higher or lower. Well, that was sort of a secondary, that was just the outcome, but it did not drive the process. I think we have a question in the audience. Sir, did you want to turn on your microphone? Okay, we'll start.
Alan Smith, Port Water Engineering. Hopefully the quick question are still defaulting to 5 minute speeds for TCs less than 5 minutes.
Yes, the question was if you have a time of concentration less than 5 minutes, do we use the 5-minute intensity? And the answer is yes, we still default to the 5-minute intensity.
Thank you.
And there was another question in the audience, you said?
Yeah, the question is for Laura, or from Laura from Respect. So, considering that NOAA Atlas 14 still uses the stationary assumption, I was wondering, when NOAA Atlas 15 is out, if it is out, will be out, have you thought about any flexibility in the future to change the NOAA Atlas 15 at all, or?
Because this is a policy question, I'll let Sarah take this one.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're eagerly awaiting the release of the NOAA Atlas 15 A and B data. So the B data incorporates climate change. These would all be policy discussions. We would certainly involve the TAC before making any sort of changes. But thank you for that question. I think there's another question in the audience.
Stephanie Bell, Atkinson House. Do you have questions?
Do you want me to answer that? Okay. Well, which company did you say you're with?
Sorry, I'm with Atkins Rails.
Atkins. I was wondering if you were a plant from Torrey Walker. I'm just kidding.
No, that's me.
I know. Thank you for that question. This has been something that has been recommended by at least one very vocal member of the technical advisory committee, and it's an excellent recommendation. But what we need to do in order to calibrate our manual is to basically install more rain gauges to collect the data in some certain smaller watersheds. Once this process has completed and we've rolled out the new manual, it is the task of our team to identify the locations where we would like to place the rain gauges and then start collecting data. I mean, we would like 30 years of data. That's not going to happen, but maybe we can do something with 5 years of data. But the first step really to do any meaningful calibration would require the actual gauge data. But thank you for that. I'm going to transition back to a question online. Sean, if you could please unmute yourself.
Hello. Just a rather non-technical question. I was interested in knowing if there will be a recording of this presentation, and if so, how will it be made available?
I like that question. Yes, we are attempting to record this training. Assuming everything goes correctly, we will be putting this on the county's webpage for people to watch. We will send the link to all of the participants. Thank you for that. And Wayne, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. A couple questions ago, they mentioned that I had a question in the chat. And my question regarding the software was whether you were coordinating with the software developers. And I know you mentioned AES and Ted Ramotka, and I guess Teddy now, but I think the other software that a lot of people use is Civil Design. Right. So I'm just wondering, and I do imagine that these software programs will still be applicable to analyses, but I'm just curious if you're coordinating with like Civil Design as well to make any needed updates to their software.
Went through a hydrology manual update before. Did we coordinate with Civil Design at that time or just with AES? I wasn't here and I don't actually recall.
You talking side stop.
Oh, okay.
The first big accuracy, but you go start continue to coordinate and find out.
I think we don't actually have a full answer for you at this moment, Wayne, but we're taking this question down and we will also on our page. I think we're compiling the questions that we received and the answers. So we'll put an answer on our webpage. Thank you for that.
Sure, because I imagine it could be about 50-50, 50% use AES, 50% use Civil Design, something like that. And Civil Design does incorporate all of the county, the 2003 county criteria. So they, at that time, they had updated their software per the county manual.
Thank you, Wayne. Now let me ask.
Thank you.
Ashkan, how much time do we have for Q&A?
Till 9:40. So
we have time. Okay. So I'm going into the Q&A and I see questions here from Alex from the city. Are C factors staying the same? There were discussions about changing C factors to align them with intensity and antecedent moisture conditions. Are you still considering this? Laura, you already answered that. No, not at this time.
In this update, there have been no changes to the threshold, the type of concentration or runoff coefficient procedures.
And then we have another question from Ibram from County Department of Public Works. Was the SD Hydro tool developed by the San Diego County team or by a software company? If it was developed by a software company, could you provide the company name?
Well, thank you for asking that question. The SD Hydro tools was created by Rig Engineering Company. Our Water Resources Division prepared the code for the hydrologic computations, prepared and tested it in accordance with the county, and then our GIS division created the package with the user interface. And the county will be providing this software free to the public. So we'll get into that after the break. We'll go over SD Hydro tools, and yes, it will be available free to the public.
Thank you. I see a question from Melissa from Caltrans. Hi, Melissa. We thought you were attending in person today. What routing method is recommended for HEC HMS runs?
So this is Melissa Wiedemeyer. Hi, Sarah. How are you? I can save my question to a module that it may apply better in if you're going to get to that module later.
So have not made any changes to the NRCS hydrologic method other than swapping out the rainfall. So it's still the NRCS hydrograph shape. No changes on that.
Did that answer your question, Melissa?
It did. I don't remember reading in the manual whether or not you had a routing method when you're calculating routing from one subbasin to another, whether or not you recommended a routing method or not. I get the NRCS shape, the basic shape, and that stays unchanged, but how about the routing method? For instance, like the Muskingum-Kunj method?
So, again, no changes were made, but I believe the hydrology manual does not specify exactly which method you have to choose. And so that leaves it open for you to choose what's most appropriate for the type of channel that the runoff is being routed through.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, this question is from Hassan from County Department of Public Works. Can you expand on the limitations and basis of the equation you had for TP for the design hydrograph? Can you expand on the limitations and basis of the equation you had for TP for the design hydrograph? But that's,
Are we talking about the rational method? The NRCS hydrograph?
Yeah, the equation that good morning, I'm Hassam.
Hassan.
The equation that you had was 240 plus half of time of concentration for the triangular method for time to peak. And to me the question is, what is the basis for that equation, and is there any limitation? Because sometimes when the sites are too small, the time to peak happens a lot faster than 2 hours after the beginning of the storm.
Sounds like we're talking about the rational method hydrograph.
Yes,
And-
correct, yeah.
Okay, so the rational method hydrograph is really a synthetic shape. Because what we need, when we calculate a peak flow rate using rational method, all we get is the peak flow rate, and we don't get a volume or a hydrograph from the Q equals CIA. So the volume is going to be equal to C times P times A, and it's still P6 as it was in the 2003 hydrology manual. So we'll still be looking for design purposes at a 6-hour rational method hydrograph. The positioning of the peak at the 2/3, 1/3 distribution, there has been no change to that, but it is a synthetic hydrograph in which we've selected a shape similar to the balanced storm hydrograph that's input for the larger watershed studies. But keep in mind, it is synthetic. What we needed is a position for the peak and a shape to mold the volume underneath the peak, in which we get the correct volume for the storm, the correct peak runoff for the storm.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is from Dr. Para. Dr. Para asks, can we use our own log interpolation? Yes, Dr. Para, you can use your own log interpolation.
We talked about that in the manual and the three forms of the equation.
Well, just you wait and see what he submits. Okay, the next question is from Nicole Fine. When will SD Hydro tools be available to the public? Is that in July 1? So the effective date of the manual and all of the tools will be available by July 1. Probably sooner. Okay. Dr. Para, I see you have a very long comment here. I think we will save that comment and county staff will contact you after this meeting. The next question, where will the recording for this presentation be made available? From the county's website, we will send a link to that to all of the attendees. Dr. Parr asks, for routing purposes, a storm duration is needed and should not be equal to time of concentration.
It's probably to rational method hydrograph, in which the decision that in 2003 was that the 6-hour storm would be the design storm for volume purposes.
Thank you.
And so there will be no change. We're not changing that.
So for designed for detention basins using a rational method hydrograph. The design storm is still a 6-hour duration.
And I see that John Quinzer from DMAX provided an answer after Dr. Paras. Thank you, John, for that. Okay. Let me see it. And then here's a question from Kieran. Is HEC HMS only for larger watersheds greater than 1 square mile? Or can we use it for smaller watersheds too?
So the hydrology manual does require the rational method for the smaller size watersheds, and I'm not further, you'll find a module in HMS that would exactly mimic the county's procedures for rational method. However, when you need to do routing of flows through a detention basin, for example, you have maybe a rational method study and you're routing those flows through a detention basin, you may need to use HMS to perform the routing calculations. SB Hydro tool and the Regret Hydro program will create that rational method hydrographs and then be exported to HMS.
Thank you for that question. I think that is all of the questions we have online. Are there any other questions in the audience? Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are getting into the breaks time. We will have 15 minutes break. So with that, we will be back at 9:55. Thank you.
I think about it.
All right. Before starting session 2, I have the sign-in sheet. I just want to make sure everyone signed it, and I will just move it around. If anyone forgets to sign it, please let me know. Raise your hand. I will bring it over to you. And with that, I will turn it over to Laura Henry to start the SD Hydro Tools training session. Thank you. Yeah. And for virtual attendees, could you please confirm that you can hear us, please? You can put in the chat or react it.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. Now we'll talk about the SD Hydro Tools software that will be provided with the updated hydrology manual. SD Hydro Tools is a free tool that will be provided by the county along with the hydrology manual. As we talked about in the previous presentations, this will replace the June 2003 hydrology manual rational hydrograph program and San Diego unit hydrograph programs. We've got replacement modules for those 2 programs. And then in addition, it adds a log interpolation utility and a nested storm utility. And it has the NOAA Atlas 14 100-year data embedded within the program. So for storms of a 100-year frequency, you will not have to retype that into the program. It's already embedded in there. And that's also a backup for you of where you could also get NOAA Atlas 14 100-year data if you were ever offline from, you couldn't access the internet and you needed to see this data. Here's the snapshot of the front page of the SD Hydro Tools program. This program includes different modules in it. So 5 different modules, which are shown across the top of the program. And we're going to go over each one of these modules in this discussion. But first, where will you get it? The program and the user instructions will be provided on the County of San Diego Hydrology Manual website. And then, but this is not an online action. So this is something that you will download the program and you can install it on your local machine. And also with it, please download the user instructions. User instructions are going to discuss how to install the program, provide you with an overview of the program layout and how it has the different modules and different tabs and windows within each module. Has really important information about how to get started, the required input and actions to initiate those program modules. Then for each of the modules, there's a description and a purpose of the module and information on how to use the module and how to export the results. All these slides that you see that have a white background, these are straight out of the user instructions. So this is what the user instructions for SD Hydro Tools will look like. So as I said, it will give you some information about the Hydro Tools layout, which is laid out with the different modules are shown in the tabs across the top. And then each one of those modules, depending on what's needed within it, may have different windows, which are shown along the left-hand side. When you open the project for the first time, or when you pull it up, anytime you're starting a new project and you open SD Hydro Tools, only the project module is actually active when you first open the program. In order to activate the other modules, the first step that you have to do is populate the rainfall data in the rainfall data window. And then because the program modules can't execute without rainfall data, so this is a required action. These other modules will be grayed out, and the first thing you have to do is put in the rainfall data. So to get that embedded 100-year rainfall data, we need to select a location, which can be selected either by scrolling on the map and dropping a pin on the map, or by entering a desired latitude and longitude. Once a valid location has been entered using either of those methods, either the latitude and longitude or the map, then the button on the bottom that says Get Data will become active. It does need to be a valid location, meaning a location that's within San Diego County. The grid of data that is embedded in SD Hydro Tools is only a county-wide grid. So if you selected outside of the county, it wouldn't be able to find data. So make sure to select something that's within San Diego County, and then the Get Data button will become active, and you'll click that, and the program will pull up the data for your project. So after it pulls up the data, it will take you to the rainfall data window, and it will show you the data. At this point, once it's been populated by the program, this data is showing to you in green boxes in the program. This is the actual data that will match exactly. If you entered the same exact latitude and longitude in the online server, it will match up exactly because this is the same grid that's in the online server. Here at this point is your opportunity. If you are preparing a 50-year study or a 10-year study, you can overwrite this data in this program. It's just that you would have to go obtain that data from the online server and then manually type it into the program, because the program just has the 100-year data embedded. And that 100-year data is embedded because 100 year is the design storm for most studies in the county, but sometimes you need to estimate a 50-year or a different event. You have the opportunity to just overwrite this data. If you overwrite it, the box will change color to indicate that the data is user entered. So once that rainfall is populated in the program, all of the other tabs become active. So now they're not grayed out. Now you can grab any of the other modules that you want to use. So you can select a tab for a desired module. It is not required to use all of the modules in a session. You can use all of the modules in a session. This is your choice. There's no particular order that you have to go through them. So which modules you use just depends on what you're doing for your project. Maybe you have a rational method, and so you need some interpolation for times of concentration, maybe a rational method hydrograph. If you're doing a larger watershed analysis, maybe you skip straight to the SD unit hydrograph module. So now I'm going to walk through each of the modules and just tell you what's in there, what's available to you. The interpolation module is a calculator that performs log-log interpolation. So this would most commonly be used probably to interpolate the intensity for a given time of concentration for a rational method study. It uses one of the equations that's presented in section 3 of the hydrology manual. So you enter the desired time, for example, your rational method time of concentration, set the units of whether you're looking for minutes or hours, click run as many times as you need to do it, and you'll just get an interpolated result. Then that data can be exported. If you'd like to save it, you can click an export button and get a file, a comma separated values file, which you can open in a text editor or you can open in Excel. Next up is the RCRAT Hydro module. This is the one that replaces the 2003 RAT Hydro program. Because we've changed our procedure for intensity to NOAA Atlas 14, we're not going to expect the results from RCRAT Hydro to match results from the old RAT Hydro program. because the intensity is calculated differently in the new program. The results from RCRAT Hydro can be exported to use in another program to perform routing analyses for a detention basin routing analysis. You can take out those results and import them to HMS in order to prepare routing calculations. So to prepare a rational method, so first complete your rational method calculations, which is calculations external to Hydro tools, and you'll get your time of concentration, your watershed area, your weighted runoff coefficient, and your peak flow rate. Those are the required input data that you'll put in these red boxes. Once you've entered the data, then the calculate button will become active. Here is some example data is entered into the program for rational method hydrograph. Now at this point, I want to point out, so the program will not judge your data. So it's your responsibility to make sure that the data is valid for a rational method hydrograph. With the rainfall, the program will judge whether your location was valid to get data. But once it comes to these modules, when you're entering your rational method time of concentration and area, et cetera, the program is just going to take what data you give it, and it's not going to review or judge that data. It will simply prepare the computations with that data. Click the calculate button. When you've calculated it, the program will move you to a new window showing a table with the data. You can hit an export button to export that comma-separated values file. Here's an example of what it looks like. It comes out, you can use it in a text editor. You can pull it up in Excel and arrange it how you need to import it to any other program that you want to use it for routing calculations. In addition, so after the program automatically moves you into a table window to show that data, but you can also return back to the home window, which shows you what input you had, and it will have calculated your total rainfall and your total runoff volumes. And you can look and see that that runoff volume equals C times P times A. That concludes the rational method modules. The next two modules are for the NRCS hydrologic method. First, we've prepared a module that's called Nested Storm Convolution. This module did not have an equivalent program provided with the 2003 hydrology manual, although what it is doing is preparing a nested storm hyetograph just as described in section 4 of the hydrology manual. The hyetograph is that rainfall input that you put in for an NRCS hydrology calculation. This program also automatically applies a rainfall depth area adjustment, just as described in the hydrology manual. Although if you want to, this module is only preparing just a hyetograph. So if you want to prepare it for no adjustment, you can enter 0 for the watershed area, because we're not trying to calculate a peak flow rate from an area with this module. So you can manipulate that watershed area if you don't want to have any kind of depth area reduction applied to your rainfall hyetograph. So you provide the required input data, the computation interval that you would like to get your hyetograph, which might be 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. That depends on the size of your watershed. Follow the guidance in section 4 for determining what's an appropriate computation interval for your watershed. And then you can enter the watershed area or enter a 0 if you don't want to have the rainfall adjusted. Click. So here it is with the data entered, and click calculate to get the results. The program then moves into a table window showing you the calculated results, which you can export to the comma-separated values file. There's the comma-separated values file. And then you can return to the home window and see the total rainfall that was found for the hyetograph, and the area adjusted rainfall depth once the depth area adjustment had been applied. The last module is the San Diego Unit Hydrograph module. This is the one that replaces the SDUH software. The change again is related to the rainfall intensity. No other changes to how we prepare a large watershed hydrology study, just the method that we use for the rainfall intensity. Because of the switch to NOAA Atlas 14, we will not expect results from the SD unit hydrograph module to match results from the SDUH module because they're calculating intensity differently. In this module, it's going to apply a rainfall depth area adjustment automatically based on the watershed area that you input. And in this case, we would not try to manipulate and get that away by putting in a watershed area of 0, because in this module, we're calculating a peak flow rate. So we need to know the total area that the rainfall is landing on in order to calculate that peak flow rate. So we provide the required input data, which is the computation interval desired, the watershed area, the adjusted curve number for the watershed area, and the watershed core lag time. So different programs want different versions of the lag time. If you're using HEC HMS and you're using a NRCS study in HEC HMS, you're putting in the NRCS lag. In this particular program, that conversion is done within the program. So you calculate the core lag using the methods presented in section 4 of the manual. You enter the core lag in this program, and the conversion to NRCS lag for the purpose of the computations, that will be taken care of by the program. So you want to make sure to use that watershed core lag time and then select a computation interval appropriate to the watershed size and the core lag time. Here's a snapshot with some data entered, and the calculate button becomes active. The program moves to the table window to show you all the processes that went into calculating that watershed, and all of this data will be exported, and you'll have your hydrograph ordinates in the far right column of the exported data. This can then be manipulated in Excel to format it how you'd like in order to import it into a program such as HEC HMS or any other program that you might be using if you're routing or combining hydrographs. Returning back to the home window gives you a summary data. This was designed to look very similar to the SDUH module. So it'll look just like what you used to get from SDUH, a summary of the data that you entered into the program and a peak flow rate. So kind of the difference here in one of the differences in SDUH, in SD unit hydrograph module compared to SDUH, in the 2003 SDUH program, you just got this text output and you just got a peak flow rate. With SD Hydro Tools, we decided to give you the hydrograph because it had to be calculated in order to get the peak flow rate. So we've given you the hydrograph as well. You can export that hydrograph from the table and then export this summary data from the home window, which shows just the summary with the peak flow rate. I'll close that with just another snapshot of the location where you'll get the instructions. This has not been published yet, but is expected to be published with the updated hydrology manual. Thank you. I'll be turning it over to John to discuss the bulking factor.
Okay. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for attending this presentation. My name is John Vidicic, and I don't know if the folks online can hear me. I'm a little bit taller than the other presenters. I will do my best to talk loudly. So I work for River Focus. We were a sub-consultant to Rick for this project, and I'll be presenting today about the new guidance added to the manual related to sediment bulking. And I'm aware that there are actually far more people attending this virtually than here in the room, so I'll do my best to look into the camera as well. But thank you for your participation, everybody. So during this presentation, I'll start off by just reviewing some background information about sediment bulking, some key concepts, and talk about how sediment bulking is often done in Southern California, and then talk about some of the sediment debris hazards specific to San Diego County. Next, I'll review the new guidance that was added to the manual, both for normal design conditions and also post-fire conditions, and then finally walk through some of the resources themselves that were added to the manual. There is a lot of information here due to just the time constraints of this presentation. I'm going to focus on just summarizing some of the key findings and key points. But for those of you who are interested, I would definitely recommend that you check out the resources that are available and continue learning. All right. So we'll start off with some background information. I think as most of you probably know, most streams convey at least some sediment and vegetative material. But hydrologic analyses like the ones previously prescribed by the hydrology manual frequently omit or maybe only implicitly consider the volumetric contribution of that material. And under normal streamflow conditions, this usually isn't a problem, especially when we have freeboard requirements and that sort of thing. But in some situations, such as following a wildfire, the quantity of eroded sediment and vegetative debris can be relatively large. So it really does need to be accounted for sometimes in the design of flood control infrastructure. So a few key concepts. First, sediment debris yield is the quantity of material that's delivered to a watershed outlet for a defined flood event or a defined period. And sediment debris is often computed at the mouth of a canyon to inform the sizing of a debris basin like the one that's shown here. This is in LA County. And the idea is that by capturing and removing some of that material or all of that material from the flow, designers can then avoid or reduce the need to account for or accommodate that additional volume farther downstream in the conveyance system. And then in other cases, design flows are sometimes increased beyond the clear water discharge to account for that transported sediment and debris. And this practice is called sediment bulking. So engineers in the region use a few different methods or approaches to bulk flows. In some cases, flows are bulked by determining the design sediment debris yield for a design event and then distributing that additional volume through the clear water design hydrograph to develop a bulked hydrograph. So you can see kind of a conceptual representation of this in the top right plot there, where that upper hydrograph is the bulked one, and that's the sum of the clear water hydrograph and the sedograph. And then in other cases, a standard bulking factor, or a factor that's equal to the ratio of the bulk flow to the clear water discharge, is determined based on either historical observations for the region or maybe assumptions based on literature. And then that factor, that bulking factor, is multiplied by the clear water discharge to develop, for example, like a peak clear water or a peak bulked flow. So the table on the bottom right summarizes some typical bulking factors that you might see and associated flow characteristics. So you can see on the far left, bulking factor of 1 corresponds to just pure clear water discharge. And by the time you get to a bulking factor of 2, you're within the range of debris flow. So wildfires can dramatically change the hydrologic and sediment response of a watershed to even modest rainstorms. But the degree of the changes is quite sensitive to the size of the watershed. So clear water flows frequently increase following wildfires for a given storm event. And that's due to several altered physical processes that occur during a fire. Generally, those result in reduced losses and also reduced time of concentration. And so as a result, a 10-year rainstorm may produce a 100 or even a 200-year peak flood event if it falls on a recently burned watershed. And then likewise, sediment and debris yields can also often increase dramatically following a wildfire, due in part to those increased clear water flows, but also due to a loss of erosion resistance in the soil. Also, there's often a large increase in the supply of woody debris to the channels following a fire. And I've seen some studies that have found sediment debris yield increases of 30 to even 100 times the normal volumes after a fire. And again, those numbers can be especially large for very small watersheds. The return of sediment debris yields to pre-fire conditions typically takes about 10 years, but it's important to note that that recovery is progressive. It follows a curve sort of shaped like this. So debris flow hazards typically return to pre-fire rates in about 1 to 3 years after a fire, though the exact timing depends a lot on the weather after the fire. And then sediment yields continue to decrease until about the decade mark. So just for context, I took this photo of a small watershed near Barrett Lake in May 2022. So for those of you who are local, you may remember the Valley Fire in 2020. It was a large fire in that area. So this photo was taken about 1.5 years after that fire. And this particular watershed was assessed by the USGS immediately following the fire as having a high probability of a debris flow occurrence. And it's a little bit difficult to see in this photo, I think, at this scale, but at this point in time, 1.5 years later, you can start to see some new vegetation emerging, but the watershed is still largely barren. The soil is still exposed. All right, so next for some regional context. In coastal Southern California, most sediment debris yield from watersheds results from just a small number of short duration storms. And it's because of this importance of individual storms that sediment engineering design in the region typically focuses on specific event yields rather than on average annual yields. Sediment debris yields and bulking factors used for flood control infrastructure design in Southern California are typically based on empirical regression equations that were developed for the transverse ranges. So this is this east-west mountain range, including parts of Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles, and San Bernardino counties. And the reason that regression equations were developed for those ranges specifically are due to a couple of factors. First is that those ranges, the transverse ranges, are highly erosive, even by global standards. And so characterizing sediment-related hazards has historically been of primary importance to those affected communities. And then second, and this is an important point, the sediment debris basins that have been developed over time to capture debris in the transverse ranges have themselves permitted the collection of the historical volume data that are required to develop those regression equations and then to be able to predict sediment debris yields. And these empirical relationships that were developed for the transverse ranges are often applied in other counties in the region, mainly just for lack of a better alternative. And San Diego's peninsular ranges, which you can see here are north-south oriented, are generally far less erosive than the transverse ranges. And it's precisely because of that there are actually fewer data available with which to develop locally appropriate regression equations. So that's a known limitation for those of us who do this type of work here in the county. And as more data become available in the future, we do expect that new methods specific to the peninsular ranges will hopefully be developed. So the previous version of the hydrology manual did not prescribe specific methods for post-fire hydrology or sediment bulking, though in practice, flows for some projects have been bulked in the past, but that's mainly been done on an ad hoc basis and mainly just using engineering judgment. And then also, while the previous version of the manual prescribed near-term and long-term sediment yield calculation requirements for some hydrologic studies, those were based on the annual yields, and the manual didn't provide specific guidance about which sites actually require mitigation. So Ash mentioned this earlier, but in 2020, the TAC, for the Technical Advisory Committee for the Hydrology Manual, formed a subcommittee that was tasked specifically with providing guidance on estimating sediment and debris yields, determining when and where sediment or debris bulking factors should be applied, and developing appropriate methods for estimating post-fire increases in clear water runoff. And in 2022, River Focus, acting as a subcontractor to RIC, performed a technical study for the county in support of these hydrology updates. So the key questions for our study were whether and where sediment debris related hazards should be planned for in San Diego County, whether and how the existing methods developed for the transverse ranges can be adapted and applied to produce conservative, but also reasonable estimates of sediment and debris yields. And then what would be some appropriate bulking factors that could be used for flood control infrastructure design in San Diego County. And so the study report was reviewed by the TAC subcommittee. You can see the cover of it shown here. And that final version, like these other resources, will be available for download at the County of San Diego Department of Public Works Flood Control section website. And then in addition to the findings presented in the results or in the report, it also presents new methods for sediment debris bulking for 3 different scenarios. So that's bulking for normal conditions, normal design conditions, and then post-fire conditions during what's often called the emergency period, so the first 2 years following a fire, and then post-fire conditions in the period 2 to 10 years after the fire while the watershed continues to recover. So as Ash mentioned, in the updated hydrology manual, sediment bulking appears in 2 new places. So first, there's a new section, section 5.6, which briefly summarizes the sediment bulking guidance, and it refers users to this 2022 study report. And then there's a new workbook, workbook 4.3, which walks through a detailed step-by-step example problem demonstrating how to actually implement the guidance for a selected location. And I'll talk briefly through that example problem in a few slides. So next we'll move on to talk about the new guidance itself. In California, bulking factors are typically applied to design discharges for facilities with either watersheds in mountainous regions that are subject to periodic wildfire, or arid regions when the facility is located near an alluvial fan. And for San Diego County, what this means is that practically speaking, many drainage basins are not expected to yield enough sediment debris during the 100-year design event to warrant the application of bulking factors under normal conditions. And so based on the new guidance, sediment debris hazards under normal conditions only need to be considered for new flood control infrastructure projects when the project is located within or immediately downstream of a selected area with elevated risk. And then appropriate methodology should be used to plan for sediment loads on a case-by-case basis. So this flow chart summarizes the process for normal conditions. And in step 1, users evaluate whether the project site is located within or immediately downstream of a potential sediment debris hazard region. And a map of these areas is presented in figure 5.8 of the manual. It looks like this. So the red shaded areas are those with assessed elevated debris production hazards and or desert alluvial fans. So if a new project isn't located within or immediately downstream of one of these red shaded areas, no mitigation is required, no further evaluation is required. And so you could move on. But if it is, then you would proceed to step 2. So the next recommended step is to evaluate whether the values in question are truly at risk, whether the value is critical, and whether the cost of repair or replacement exceeds the likely cost of the mitigation. And if so, then the next step is for users to confirm with the county whether or not mitigation will actually be required. And this is an important takeaway, I think, of this presentation. So because the sediment bulking guidance is new for San Diego County, and the impacts of these policies on project cost and feasibility isn't well understood yet, the intention of this review gateway with the county is to provide the county with some flexibility as it tests the real world implications of these new policies. But assuming that the county confirms that the mitigation is required, then users would proceed to step 3. So generally speaking, sediment debris hazards should be mitigated using one or both of 2 options. So either a sediment debris basin can be constructed, or a bulking factor can be applied to increase the flow magnitude for which the conveyance structures are designed. So first, to avoid or reduce the need for downstream flow bulking, and also when it's actually allowed based on the county's hydro modification and critical coarse sediment yield area regulations, sediment debris basins can be designed at or near canyon outlets and sized with sufficient capacity and the appropriate hydraulics to capture and store the estimated 100-year sediment debris event. And the 100-year sediment debris yield at the selected basin location should be estimated by performing what's called a coincident frequency analysis or a combined probability analysis for fire and either precipitation or runoff, and applying the Army Corps of Engineers Los Angeles District debris method. And this analysis can be applied using fully publicly available data. Also, you can implement the coincident frequency analysis directly within HEC SSP, which is another HEC software package that some of you may know, a statistical package. So it's built into that software. And then alternatively, downstream flood conveyance infrastructure needs to be sized to convey the bulk peak flow using either of two approaches. So the first would be to estimate the sediment and debris yield using that same coincident frequency analysis and Army Corps of Engineers district debris method, and then distribute that total sediment volume through the design 100-year Clearwater hydrograph. And the computed bulking factor at the peak should be at minimum 1.2 and maximum 1.5 for normal conditions. And we would expect that bulking factors would be at the lower end for larger watersheds. So watersheds larger than 3 square miles, we would expect to be closer to that 1.2. And then if preferred, instead of doing the detailed analysis, designers can simply apply a standard bulking factor that's conservative without any additional work. So that would be 1.2 for drainage areas larger than 3 square miles and 1.5 for drainage areas less than or smaller than or equal to 3 square miles. As I mentioned, fire often dramatically changes sediment and flood risk calculations. So a watershed that has maybe relatively low risk of sediment debris hazards under normal conditions, maybe one that doesn't even require any sort of special analysis under normal conditions based on the recommendations of the study, may pose substantial risks to critical infrastructure after a fire. So as I mentioned before, the effects of wildfire on both Clearwater hydrology and also sediment debris loading are typically largest in the first 2 years following a fire, and then they diminish as the watershed recovers. And there's substantial uncertainty, I'll say, in the methods that are currently available, especially for that initial period, that emergency period. Often the methods themselves are uncertain, and also fewer data are often available immediately following a fire. And this is a very active area of research with evolving best practices. To be honest, some of the best practices have continued to evolve even since we performed this study 4 years ago. So it's quite a quickly changing landscape. So because of that, we recommend that sediment debris yields and bulking factors assigned during those first 2 years following a fire be determined in consultation with the county or the California Geological Survey's Burn Watersheds Geohazards program. That's a really fantastic program. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's headed by Don Lindsay. It itself is a new program that was founded since this report was done. I think they were founded in 2023, but they're a great resource for this type of analysis. And in lieu of all of that, if you need just a quick assessment, a bulking factor of 2 could often be assumed during this emergency period. Again, like I mentioned before, that corresponds to a debris flow, and it would be conservative for all but the most extreme cases. And then for hydrologic studies in watersheds 2 to 10 years post-fire, when the runoff and debris flow hazards have decreased substantially, and also there's often more time available to do an analysis and more data available, we recommend that bulking factors be determined using the same basic methods used for normal conditions, with 2 main differences that are highlighted on this slide. So first, planning should be done for the current burn condition rather than for that statistically based 100-year sediment debris event. And then also the bracketing and standard bulking factors are slightly larger for the post-fire case. So the lower end would be 1.25 instead of 1.2, and the upper end would be 1.7 instead of 1.5. And for cases where the project has both recently burned and is located within one of these mapped hazard areas, you would want to compute the yield using both methods and choose the larger of the 2. All right, so next I'll just very briefly show you the example problem in workbook section 4.3. which considers the case, this is just a purely hypothetical case, but it's a concrete drainage channel planned for a new development east of Ramona. And I won't have time to go through all the steps in detail, but the workbook itself does go through with quite a lot of detail. So would encourage you to take a look at that. So in this hypothetical situation, the project drains an undeveloped 1 square mile watershed, and it's not feasible to construct an upstream debris basin. And a rainfall runoff hydrologic model has been developed apparently to compute the Clearwater design flows and develop the hydrograph, the Clearwater hydrograph. And so the task before us is to determine whether or not sediment debris bulking is required for the project or potentially required. And then if so, to compute the bulk hydrograph and peak discharge. So step 1 is to refer to the sediment debris hazard map in figure 5.8. Here's a zoomed in view of it with the project watershed. So you can see the project watershed is located within the hazard area. So sediment debris loading may need to be evaluated for this site under normal conditions. Step 2, we evaluate whether the planned infrastructure associated with this project is truly at risk. So for this case, the project is a drainage channel in this new development, and the adequacy of its design will be directly affected by any flow bulking due to sediment debris loading. And also due to the slope of the channel, we assess that any debris flows in the upper regions, reaches of this watershed may affect this channel. So at this point, we check in with the county, we present our assessment to them, and they confirm that indeed the channel must be designed to convey the bulk flow. This would not be much of an example problem if they hadn't. So for step 3, we identify the appropriate mitigation option or options. So for the example, based on the information that was given, it apparently isn't feasible to construct an upstream debris basin to reduce the sediment debris loading at the project location. So the design flow needs to be used to size the project channel, the design flow used to design the channel needs to be bulked. And so this can be done in one of 2 ways, like we talked about, those 2 options. So either we can estimate the sediment debris yield and distribute it through the hydrograph, or we can apply a standard bulking factor. So like I said, we don't have time to go through all the steps of the coincident frequency analysis here, but we can imagine that we've developed independent frequency curves for both the fire and precipitation at this site. We've applied the LA district debris method, and we've used SSP to develop a frequency curve for the unit sediment debris yield for this watershed. So that's this curve on the left side. And so we can, with that point indicates the 100-year unit sediment debris yield. So we pull that off of the curve. We multiply it by the watershed area and also a correction factor that's appropriate for this watershed. And then the result is the 100-year sediment debris yield. And then that volume of material is then distributed through the Clearwater hydrograph previously developed using an HEC HMS model. And it results in the bulk hydrograph shown on the right. And if you do the math at the peak, the computed bulking factor is 1.15 for this example problem, which is slightly lower than the minimum 1.2. So for this option, option 1, a bulking factor of 1.2 can be applied. And then alternatively, in lieu of doing all of that, designers could opt to just use a standard conservative bulking factor. And in this case, because the watershed area is smaller than 3 square miles, it's just about a 1 square mile watershed, a bulking factor of 1.5 would be used. And so the result is that in this example problem, applying option 2 produces a design peak bulk flow, which is which is 25% larger than the result we get using option 1. So this illustrates the potential reduction in design flow that can be justified based on a more detailed analysis. I think you'll find that option 2 will often result in a comparatively large bulking factor to account for that larger uncertainty if the sediment debris yield is not evaluated explicitly. All right, so just to wrap up, historically, regional sediment debris hazard mitigation has mainly occurred after damaging debris and sediment-laden flows. And this really appears to be changing as researchers and public agencies recognize the likely future impacts of increasingly frequent and intense fires and frequently intense rainfall. And begin to review and revisit policies aimed at protecting lives and safety, property, and infrastructure. And the past decade has really seen substantial growth in post-fire hydrology and sediment debris hazard research. And like San Diego County, many other counties in the region have recently or are currently revisiting their own policies regarding these topics. So San Diego is in good company. Given the changing climate and also the pace of new research, we presented this new sediment bulking guidance as a starting point. Due to the expected changes in both the hazards themselves as well as the best practices, we do envision that the policies established based on the study will be periodically revisited and updated. All right, so thank you for your time. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ashkan to talk about grandfathering.
All right, thank you, John. We are here for grandfathering eligibility to proceed under earlier hydrology manual provisions. This will be the last topic, but not the least. So we have received multiple emails regarding the county approach for the transition to the new manual and if there is any grandfathering criteria. So we have prepared the guideline and it will be released shortly by the effective date. The purpose of this document is to provide a clear and predictable transition to the new manual and allow projects that they are already in review process or they have the hydrology study approval to proceed without unnecessary rework in some certain conditions, and also to prevent repeated hydrology revisions driven solely by the timing, which allow projects to benefit from updated methodologies where appropriate for the project purposes. So as I mentioned, the guidance document will be coming out shortly. It will be uploaded to the county flood control section website by the effective date, which is July 3rd, 2026. And within this document, you will see a terminology substantive change multiple times, and just want to clarify what does it mean. So any modification to the project that results in a new hydrology study, the county will consider it as a substantive change. So these are the examples, such as input parameters or flow characteristics or drainage parameters or system capacities. So in this document, generally, we categorize projects into 3 different groups. The first one will be, actually it will be based on hydrology study submittal status. So the first group is the new projects. So that we define it as a project that their first complete hydrology submittal, the complete hydrology submittal is accepted by the county after the effective date. There is a requirement to comply with the 2026 manual. But for the projects that they are their hydrology studies is still in the review and their complete hydrology submittal is accepted prior to the effective date, we will provide the flexibility for those projects to either proceed under the same manual version, or they will be able to elect to transfer the 2026 manual. There will be also projects that they have prior hydrology approval before the effective date. We will also have a flexible approach with those projects within the grace period. So we define a grace period, and that will be a 1 year beginning since the effective date of 2026 manual. And this grace period will apply to both projects already in review process, and they have the Excel record number with the County of San Diego. And those projects that they have previously approval for their hydrology study, and they are requesting a substantive change. So we will be also flexible with those projects to either continue with the current project, manual version, or transfer to the new one. County will have the decision authority, and county needs to determine the hydrology manual applicability and grandfathering eligibility based on the guideline document. And this determination will be recorded in project records from the county side. And applicants should be noticed that they are responsible for identifying their project status and requesting the manual selection if it is desired. But that becomes the question roundtable with Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ashkan. Wait, don't go so fast. I need to make sure I get to the questions. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, maybe I'll start. Are there any questions from the audience? Chalisa.
So the old grid graph called hydrogram. The old grid graph hydro software generated the 6-hour hydrogram, and it always started at 0, 0. So it kind of goes 0, 2, 0. I noticed that the new replacement software under SD Hydro Tools does not start with 0, 0. So I was just wondering if it could be updated to start at 0, 0. It's important for detention routing to terminate between timing from 0 and the first point of the header. I question that this, so this is impacted by, even prior to the original rat hydro being provided by the county. Rick was using this program and had it export something that had a little timing offset. So if you had, let's say, 3 watersheds, there would be a key to that timing offset that would be exported along with the data. And so it looks like, so based on your question, it sounds like we need to take a look at that and see whether that timing offset is something that we need to give you the time of where the 0 occurs, or whether they need to shift it. So thank you for that, and let's work on that.
I think there was another hand up. Yes.
This is Jan Bass from Hansiker, and my question is to Laura. So for the graph hydro, the P6 calculated, is it from the intensity with the model, or it's from the NOAA Atlas?
All the calculations in the graph hydro were related to the NOAA Atlas 14 data.
So this P6 would be based for 100 years.
It's from the 100-year 6-hour.
So if we're doing the graph hydro for the 50 year, we'll put that P6 from the NOAA Atlas manually.
Yes, so if you would like to prepare a 50-year version, you can overwrite the data. You'll have to first have the program gather it in order for it to initiate the modules, but then you have an opportunity that you can overwrite it with 50-year data. So what you would do is take your NOAA Atlas 14 output from the data server, and for the 50-year data, enter the 5-minute, the 10-minute, and each of those data times that's requested by the program. You would overwrite that, and then the program would be using that data. So it would be a 50-year P6 that it would calculate the volume.
So the P6 is calculated actually, because when you get your information from NOAA, there is the option to get the P6, the precipitation from NOAA right away. Right, for the 100-year and the 50-year. So
that's the data that it will use, is that data point provided from NOAA Atlas 14.
Okay. And my second question is for the debris basins and the burn conditions. So Riverside County, they have their own standards for basin details, and when you're designing this debris basins, and I don't think San Diego County have that much detail. So if we are designing a debris basins, should we refer to Riverside County, or like how is it like or the county will have their own standards, or are we thinking about like updating standards to include more details about debris basins?
Thank you for that question. So when I started this morning introducing myself, I explained I was from Chicago. And when I moved here, there were a lot of things about the climate and the land use that really puzzled me. And one thing I observed was when I drove in, let's say like LA County or Riverside County or Ventura County, I saw a lot of these very large sediment basins that the municipalities or the counties maintained. And working for the county of San Diego, I saw that we did not have these kinds of facilities. And it was notable to me. And what I really appreciate about this study that John and his team did is I actually came to understand why. And that's because the risk in our mountain ranges, in our area of the country and the state, while the risk is there, it's so much different. It's orders of magnitude different from those the transverse range mountains, the communities that are up there. So our effort in this hydrology manual update was to start a discussion and to start quantifying the risk. Do I think that there's going to be a lot of projects that are going to be required to actually do a study and to implement the mitigation measures? My sense at this moment is for private development projects, likely not. Here's where my caveat is. I think if we're talking about critical infrastructure in the way that like HUD defines critical infrastructure, I think if we're talking about county facilities where we elect to pay a little bit more to have more resilience built into our project, I expect that we might be seeing more of that. This is really an effort for us to start a policy decision with our elected officials, if that makes sense. So you raise a good point. Well, what if there's a project that wants to use these, what standards should we rely on? I think that's a conversation that we're probably going to have with the technical advisory committee. By the way, I see people here who did not participate in the technical advisory committee. And if you're interested in participating in future conversations with the technical advisory committee, please let us know. And we will include you on the email distribution list. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't have an answer for you at this moment. We would certainly defer to the project's professional engineer who's stamping the plans to make a recommendation about which standards would be appropriate in this use until and if the county sort of develops our own standard.
I just want to add that. So first of all, and the technical is we have a project now like going in Riverside County and it's in the downstream of like a huge mountain. We have all this the sediment debris basins designed. However, I see that the options we have here is like either you include the bulk factor or design the sediment debris basins. I think there is an option to still that will be implementing the bulk factor to calculate the Q. However, it doesn't mean either you have to upsize all your storm drain downstream. It will be implementing another type of BNP if the like a small watershed or like let's say a portion of that watershed reaching a head wall. There's another BNPs in the Riverside County that will be implemented for this condition. So if we don't have that in the manual, however, still we can evaluate that in our designs, right? I understand that we'll not have that a lot here. However, still like we have sometimes when we are in a high risk fire area and the development is downstream of the mountain. So we can consider looking at another BNPs as well.
So I appreciate that question too. And just to be clear, I know this is clear for you, but just to be clear, these are requirements just for within San Diego County, not for other counties. We are very open to other sort of analyses that an experienced engineer who would stamp it would perform. Certainly, I'd say within the next year or so, as we're rolling this out. Did you want to say something, John?
Once you're done.
Okay. Also, I will say it's not trivial for us to update the hydrology manual. It doesn't require, for example, our elected officials to vote on that. They have delegated authority to our director. So if we see something in the implementation of this manual, let's say in the first 6 months or the first year, we think this is something that needs to be addressed and potentially changed, we can bring it to the TAC. And then once the TAC discusses it and makes a recommendation, we can bring it to our director. So it's not, you wouldn't guess it by seeing the last time we updated the manual, but it really shouldn't be that difficult to update the manual. John?
Thank you. Just one other note, I didn't say this during the presentation, but the scope of our study was really limited to hydrologic impacts, but hydraulics matters a lot too, right? So your question about potential downstream impacts of elevated sediment reloading. So deposition happens along the system, right? And so the impacts on downstream view, like for example, a debris flow, like the runout reach is typically limited to a pretty high gradient area. And so elevated loading at the level like a bulking factor of 2 or whatever from a debris flow, that's not going to make it down to the lower reaches of the watershed, which much shallower slopes. So the hydraulic analysis is a key part of this as well, even though it's not explicitly discussed here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question.
Sure.
So if we have a tentative map drainage study was approved under the old manual, in the final engineering, should we use the new manual or we can start with the old study?
So I think with the publication of the grandfathering provisions document, it's going to be clear. Let me just say, we are going to be very flexible about this, certainly within the grace period. So if the new manual, it's going into effect July 1, the grace 2026, the grace period will be 1 year. Really, it's probably going to be up to the project engineer about what they would like to do, because there's a cost and benefit, right, of reopening your hydrology. So if you remember the grandfathering discussions with the stormwater permit, there were legal challenges to that. We don't anticipate that sort of response because unlike the stormwater permit, the new hydrology manual, which is based on best available information and actual rainfall data, is likely presenting a workflow.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Was there a, yes, ma'am?
Yeah. A couple more questions on the side. How often are those high risk maps updated?
That's an excellent question. That's a great question. So our county, I believe our county GIS group provided the data to create that map.
Some of it.
Some of it.
We delineated the hazard based on a few different, and the report itself, the study report talks about how it was developed. I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. So the study report describes in detail how the hazard layer was developed. And so in terms of like the future updates, that's a county question. But you may be able to infer based on the data themselves, the data sources themselves, what's likely to change in place.
And what I can tell you is, our County Office of Emergency Services produces maps during and after wildfire events, and they create a shape of the areas at risk. So if we're looking at a watershed that has recently been burned, we would probably default to that map, to the County Office of Emergency Services map. Oh. Okay, thank you. Any other questions maybe, please.
Quick question for Laura. So the 100-year storm called out is having the tool. Is this based on the partial series or is it based on that?
It's based on the question was the NOAA Atlas 14 data that's embedded in SP Hydro Tools program. Is it based on the partial duration series or the annual series? And the answer is it is based on the partial duration series.
So if we want to use the annual maximum, it's still going to override the annual, right?
Yes, that's correct. If you would like to use a different form of the data, you would
me to just directly download that from NOAA's 14 and then really take it.
I think there was a question. Yes, sir.
Alex, the plant for under engineering. Two-part question regarding SD Hydro tools. One, does the program automatically generate the time step that's in the output hydrograph? And if so, is there an option to maybe have it produce minor time steps with the T-speed? Sometimes that's useful for routing in HMS. They have kind of pre-cooked time steps where you want to feed it the hydrograph, so there's something to consider. And then secondly, for small sites specifically, I know the old riprap hydro, sometimes if the site was small enough, it would produce runoff for majority of the ascending and descending limb of the hydrograph. So is there a decimal option as well for output here? Or I think it went to the 10th place in the old version of the software. But with this new one, are you able to speak to that rounding output?
Yes, if I can speak to that. First, if you don't mind, I'd like to revisit the previous question about the partial duration series and the annual maximum series, and just clarify that the standard for design for any, when we're designing a project, the standard will be the partial duration series. So yes, you can substitute an annual maximum series if you want to do some testing for something, but for design, the standard.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. And I think since that would be a deviation from the standard, it would be imperative on the engineer to describe why the change is necessary for this project and to include it in the narrative. Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me to go back to that. Okay, so the questions about SD Hydro tools. The first question was being able to input the time step. For the larger watershed studies, the time step is a requested data input. So yes, you're in charge of the time step for the nested storm convolution and San Diego unit hydrograph. On the rational method hydrograph, the standard for the time step is to input the time of concentration for the study. But really, the only thing that matters is that we get the right peak flow rate and we get the right volume. So if you did input a different time step because you preferred to see a 5-minute time step or a 10-minute time step, as long as you still get the right peak flow and you get the right volume generated, in a way it's all the same. But I should warn you that if your time step is very different, for example, if you have an actual 15-minute time concentration and you input a 5-minute time step, you may get a point that's out of order. And the reason is because as a convenience to have your rational method hydrograph exactly match your rational method, we allow you to input that peak flow rate. And so instead of the program calculating the peak point, it takes the user input peak point. So that relieves you of trying to explain any issues where you had a 7.5-minute time of concentration and you calculated the flow, but then you had to enter a whole number in rational method hydrograph. So the program would calculate it in peak flow. So what it's doing is it's using the user entered peak flow rate, and then it's computing all of the other peak flow rates. So if your time step is very different from your actual rational method time of concentration, you have a risk of having point number 2 come out calculated higher than point number 1. So we advise keeping it either to exactly the time of concentration or as close as possible. And actually, this kind of gives me an opportunity for another public service announcement on riprap hydro, which is that, and this is written in the section 6 of the hydrology manual. So my advice is the hydrograph is going to be based off of the time of concentration for the last time that area was input to the system. So if you happen to have a 100-foot pipe at the end of your system and you continue your rational method by adding travel time through the pipe, but don't add any area to the system, then you get a time of concentration that's off from the last calculated peak flow rate. And that could also cause you to have a wrong point in the rational method hydrograph by inputting a time of concentration that's too long. So it's important to input the time of concentration that is associated to the last time that area has been input to the system to calculate flow rate. Does that answer all of yours?
Yeah, the second part was just with regards to output and rounding.
The decimal output.
Yes.
So I think that it's going to come out to an extreme number of decimals, 5, 6, 7, or 8 decimal points in the output now.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start looking at questions in the Q&A. This is from Dr. Para. This is for you, Laura. At what time does the peak occur if time of concentration is not a multiple value of 240 in your new model? For rat hydro, when time of concentration equals 7 minutes or 11 minutes, the peak flow occurs at time equals 245 minutes instead of 247 minutes, and time of 253 minutes instead of 251 minutes respectively. Is there anything you would like to add?
Thank you. So first, I want to say that I know what you're talking about because this question had been submitted to us via email several months ago, and we had looked into this. So while I'm not able to answer that question on the spot, and I believe this is very similar to Teresa's question, or what I mean is, I know why this is happening, so I will provide a written response to this.
Okay, thank you. And that will be posted on our webpage with the other questions. Okay, thank you for that. Alex from the city says, could you please confirm that this new manual is effective July 1, 2026? Yes. And I wish we had more time to review it, to play with the tools. Well, the TAC did have some months to review this and provide feedback. However, we hope that people, as they work with this software and with the manual, that they will share their input with us. And if you see something, an issue that should be addressed, or something that can be revised, if it's fairly small, we can probably incorporate it pretty quickly. If it's something larger, a note will be made of it to be included in the next hydrology manual update. Okay, Melissa from Caltrans. Will sediment bulking be used for San Diego County bridge improvements that utilize Federal Highway Authority funds? Oh, Melissa, that's a really good question. That will require a policy decision, and we need to have those conversations internally. But if you have some feedback on maybe a Caltrans practice or thought about this issue, would love to have a conversation with you about that. Okay, the next question is from Ricardo Ramirez. Will sediment bulking criteria change the county's perspective on how we look at flowage easements, or reconsider having these as conditions of approval for large subdivisions of private initiated projects? Wow, that's a really interesting question. And I would say, let me start with a little bit of background. So, I would say that flowage easements for the county were mostly accepted at a time before we had FEMA floodplain maps, or before we even had county floodplain maps, where we had some available information that indicated there was a flood risk, but we didn't have a detailed study. So we wanted to indicate on a map that this is the best available information that we have. This area should be analyzed before projects are developed on or adjacent to these areas. And we protected these areas with flowage easements. I don't want to say that they're completely archaic, but we're more in the business of vacating flowage easements, especially when a detailed study has been prepared for an area after this flowage easement was accepted. So I would say that I don't believe that the bulking criteria information will change the county's perspective on flowage easements. I hope I've answered your question, but please reach out to me if I did not. The next question is from Jeff Novoa. Is there a preference from the county on documenting the precipitation data for a drainage study, either from the NOAA 14 website or from the SD Hydro Tools program? Well, I think the SD Hydro Tools program will, I don't know, did you want to add something?
Really no preference because they are exactly the same. It is the NOAA Atlas 14 data set. The same one is embedded in the program. So my recommendation for any project would be go to the website and download the data from the website in both inches and inches per hour and save it for the project. And then what you will have is you'll have not just the 100-year, but all the different return periods and all that data. It also extends past 24 hours if you want to know a longer storm. So really for your project file, I would recommend putting it from the NOAA Atlas 14 website. But as far as documentation from SD Hydro Tools versus NOAA Atlas 14 website, the 100-year data in SD Hydro Tools is exactly the same.
Yeah, I don't think the county would have a preference at all. I think we hope that the SD Hydro Tools program will save you all time. So feel free to use it.
The number one thing is record the latitude and longitude.
Yeah.
And if you record the latitude and longitude, you'll always be able to reproduce exactly the same data. It's much more reliable than remembering the project address. And also it's suitable for when the center of the watershed is not located within the project address. So that latitude and longitude is the most important thing, and then you can always use the exact same data.
Thank you for that. I think we have another question in the audience.
Alan Butcher, SPNL. A couple of documentation questions. Does the manual include documentation as to how to derive the runoff hydrograph, the rational method hydrograph, longhand? Well, it's a spreadsheet.
Yes, section 6 provides the equations and the description of the method, and then also the workbook portion of the hydrology manual has an example calculation of the rational method hydrograph. Do it like that.
Okay. And I think you touched on this before. Is there any way to save any project file associated with the data that you're inputting?
For SD Hydro Tools, we can export the calculated data, and I don't know if you've tested the beta version that went out with the tag, but we have updated the export. So compared to what you saw on the slides today, there's been a modification to what we export, where now it will always export the latitude and longitude and the user input data along with the output data.
Yeah, I was looking more for a file that you can come back to when your project changes. And, you know, my detention basin design is based on 4 acres, and now I have a shift on the site, and now it's 4.5. There's nothing I can read back into the program and just change the area and run the analysis.
So it doesn't offer a feature to save and load and reload the program. However, each module of the program only requires 2 to 4 data inputs. So it would be very easy to reproduce. Again, using the exact same latitude and longitude, you'll get the exact same rainfall data. And then each module, for example, the rational method hydrograph requires only 4 data inputs. San Diego unit hydrograph requires only 4 data inputs, so it would be able to just retype those in.
Last question, are you guys going to maintain like a frequently asked questions and official responses on the website like you do for the annual?
Well, certainly for these questions that we're receiving today, we will include that. And I mean, I think if we see questions that come in repeatedly, I imagine we would update that document. Thank you. Oh.
Yeah.
On the topic of using the centroid, the point research data from centroid for very large watersheds, was there any thought given to using the aerial average of that watershed as opposed to using the centroid? And the reason I'm asking is because I've just found elsewhere, for example, San Bernardino County, as far as I know, they're one of the few other counties that have incorporated Atlas data into their means of methods. They do recommend that. And you could be under predicting flow when you're relying on the centroid point rather than the aerial average, because you're capturing higher elevations, more intense rainfall depths, things of that nature.
That is a very interesting question because actually, well, so first, the straight answer to that question is that there were no changes to the procedure that was already in section 4, which is selected from the centroid, and you apply a depth area reduction. So this is a very interesting question because what I'm hearing from you is that using that aerial average would tend to increase the rainfall, whereas the current procedure in section 4 of the manual, when you apply the depth area reduction, if it's a large enough watershed, it will actually reduce the total rainfall. So that is a question that probably needs to be evaluated by the county and the TAC to determine if that is a type of change that would be desired in the future.
Yeah, I found specifically it has the most impact on the shorter duration, like the 5 minute up to about the 3 hour. In that range, you're gonna probably find, even though we're talking about maybe 0.1, 0.05 inches, that you apply that to a very large watershed, it can increase the runoff by quite that peak.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. If we can pass the mic.
Okay. Hi, Jennifer, LSA. I just have a quick question. I wrote some notes about ADS. I know that we're reading behind that intensity equation, and there's a new one. And you said that you guys were reaching out to ADS and said that you get that updated. Do you know when it will be updated? Because if this is effective July 1st, I just want to know if the program will be available.
Thank you for that question. So Laura described a workaround for AES as we continue our coordination with the son of the person who designed AES. And that will be published on our webpage. We actually have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something? Okay. So that workaround, that temporary workaround will be published on our webpage. Regarding civil design, I think we need to take that back to our office to discuss that because I'm not completely sure that we use that. So more to come on that. Thank you. Any other questions? Last call for questions also in the chat. I am not seeing any. So Ashkan,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the consulting team here with us today and county staff who have been involved in this effort, we would like to sincerely thank you all for attending either in person or online. We appreciate your questions and your comments because that helps us to make a better manual. And this is not necessarily a static document. We do have the ability to continue to update it, both in terms of, there were some questions about C value and time of concentration, and certainly these are topics we want to discuss in a more comprehensive update. But even if there are smaller kind of issues that you discover, we appreciate you letting us know. So thank you again for attending, and Please keep in touch and let us know how it's working out for you. Thank you. Are you going to end the show now? We're definitely going to need a debrief.